Mr. President, one of the great honors in this body is to bring a contrasting point of view to a topic of the day. I hope to do that today. Many of my colleagues in this body have voiced concerns on both sides of the aisle, frankly, about President Trump, what President Trump is doing to try to create a more level playing field for our workers and businesses. They're nervous about his negotiating style, about things he says, what he's trying to do with our allies, our adversaries, and all that around the world. People in this body worry sometimes it's going to create a trade war. Well, colleagues, I've worked in the trade environment internationally most of my career. I've sourced products all over the world. I've shipped products all over the world. And I can tell you for a fact that in the last 40 years, we have been in a trade war. In that time, America has helped develop the third world and reduce global poverty, largely because of an imbalanced trade agreement that we made with pretty much each country around the world. And we did that intentionally. This was not by accident. It was out of our goodwill that we set up trade deals that granted access to our markets while denying us access to other markets around the world. Well, why would we do that? Well, when China was a $1 trillion economy, that made sense. We wanted to help them develop economically. Now that they're a $12 trillion economy, it no longer makes sense, Mr. President. When Japan was rebuilding after World War II, of course we wanted to help them rebuild. We spent billions of dollars behind the Marshall Plan to do just that with Japan and all of East Asia. We then set up trade deals that we knew would help their economy grow. And that made sense then. It no longer makes sense to have an unlevel playing field with the rest of the world just so they can develop. And let me give you a reason why. One of the reasons is that because of the American consumer and taxpayer, global poverty over the last 50 years has been reduced dramatically by some estimates of over 60%. Let me say that again. Global poverty, because of the American taxpayer and the American worker, has been reduced over 60%. Unfortunately, during that same period of time, American poverty, since 1965, when the Great Society was signed into law and the Great War on Poverty was initiated, we spent some $6 to $7 trillion trying to eradicate poverty in America. Unfortunately, today, we know poverty is basically the same as it was in 1965. So this imbalance that we've lived with for the last half decade that partially helped the development of the third world, brought hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, begins to not make sense when it damages our well-being here at home. Like me, President Trump is an outsider to this political process. He's just a business guy who spent his career successfully negotiating deals all over the world. For years, he's seen how America has often been treated unfairly when it comes to trade. He's also seen how previous administrations repeatedly failed to contain the growing threat of rogue regimes with nuclear ambitions like North Korea and Iran. Since taking office, President Trump has put America back in a position of power and strength when it comes to our standing with the rest of the world. Now, this comes after a decade where America withdrew. We had red lines drawn. We had a Russia reset. The world was questioning what our position was. Were we going to be the leader of the free world? Were we going to stand up for individual sovereignty, for individual liberty, self-determination? I think he's made that very clear that we've turned a corner here. President Trump has, no doubt, an unconventional negotiating style, an outsider style, if you will. But you know what? As we've seen in his personal career, but as we've seen in his presidential career just in the last 15 months, NATO, South Korea, and just last night, a historic summit in North Korea. President Trump's methodology indeed works. Remember when he was running for office? He said, well, if NATO doesn't increase their military spending, we just might back out. Everybody went panicked. They, oh my goodness, we're going to have, it'll upset the balance with our allies over there. This is not the time to be doing that. Well, guess what? NATO stepped up. I just met with an ambassador, a major ambassador from one of the countries in that region, and I'm delighted to tell my colleagues tonight, and we all know that basically NATO is doubling the amount of money they're spending for their own national security, which is exactly what the president wanted. President Trump is working to fix problems that others would not address, and he's moving it with a sense of urgency to deliver those results. So I'm tired of members in this body trying to undercut him at every turn, and especially in the middle of the negotiation process. One of the things you learn when you deal internationally is that you have to have respect of the person you're negotiating with across the table. President Trump has earned that. What we're beginning to do in this body is undercut that. I understand the Article 2, Article 1 debate. I get that. But we're in the middle of processes now that are so critical. You cannot deal with trade in a one-dimensional fashion. It's part of the bigger geopolitical, complex calculus that President Trump is trying to negotiate. We need a unified voice, there's no doubt. But right now, this body is sending mixed signals. It's time to put aside political self-interest and focus on what's best for the United States of America. As a business guy, I would think this is something my colleagues, especially those who come from the business community, would understand. That's what we have to do all the time in the real world. Last year, President Trump said that job one was to grow the economy. As a body, you and I, we all together focused on regulations, energy, and taxes. And as a result, the economy has begun to turn a corner. Just this year, we passed a moderate bill that modifies Dodd-Frank and frees up onerous regulations on small and community banks and regional banks, freeing up some $6 trillion all in between regulation and taxes and the work in Dodd-Frank. $6 trillion potentially coming back into the economy. And that affects people who work for a living, not just the people who own the businesses. Today, small business optimism is at a 30-year high. Some 3.5 million jobs have been created. 870 regulations have been reversed. Over 1,500 people in the Veterans Administration have been let go because they were not concerned and did not perform their job properly. This year, it's all about continuing to grow the economy by focusing on immigration, infrastructure, and trade. Trade is a very complex matrix of countries and industries. It's not just a very simple thing of back and forth. I understand the President's trying to do it in a bilateral way. I personally would prefer the TPP approach, but that's just two individuals. We're committed to this bilateral path, and I fully support that now. So, of course, how we deal with each one should be thoughtful and strategic, and we need to be in a hurry to get that done. We need a holistic approach to trade, not the ad hoc approach we've seen in the past. But you know what? If you want meaningful results in trade, then you have to have the courage to have serious, tough conversations with other countries, regardless of how many headaches it may cause for some folks here in Washington. And that includes some of our allies, by the way. The imbalance we have in trade is not just with China, it's with pretty much every one of our allies. And the solutions are not controversial. They can be dealt with directly. When it comes to trade, including trade with some of our closest allies, America isn't being treated fairly. We've covered that already. And we've been in this position for some time, and it is really of our own making. We did this intentionally. President Trump is working to begin to fix this by negotiating better trade deals for American businesses, products, and workers. Make no mistake, the beneficiaries of these trade negotiations are American consumers and American workers. Trump is doing so from a position of strength, I believe, and he's leveraging that strength to get a better deal. It's not about appending alliances. It's about telling other countries we aren't going to stand for anything less than a level playing field. I think that's only fair when we're dealing with our allies or our adversaries. President Trump has the attention of the world and the momentum to pull off better trade deals. So why are members of this body trying to confuse and complicate the process by undermining the President's efforts? Furthermore, we cannot discuss trade in a vacuum. Credibility of the negotiator is all important when dealing with certain parts of the world. We need to take that into consideration when we're considering things that we've been debating here in the last 24 hours on this floor. We need to talk about trade from an economic and national security standpoint. It is, in fact, a full-blown, complex geopolitical issue. To that point, we should all share the priority of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. President Trump is also working from a position of strength in that topic. This president and his team have the momentum to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Imagine what progress that would be if achieved compared to just 6 months ago when the worst was being contemplated. Just as President Trump has brought China to the trade table, he secured their cooperation with North Korea. And I can tell you personally, having just visited there recently, we would not be in these negotiations with North Korea without the help of President Xi Jinping and the Chinese people. President Trump's leadership on this maximum pressure campaign led to China's cooperation on tough sanctions, which helped bring North Korea to the table in the first place. The president made a personal commitment to another foreign leader about how to deal with ZTE. He should be able to follow through on his word. This agreement may be tied to other elements of this administration's national security agenda that we don't know about in full details, but we need to give them the benefit of the doubt and stop undercutting the negotiating power of our commander-in-chief. This ZTE amendment, which has been thrown into the NDAA at the last minute and before the Commerce Department made its full ruling, could threaten China's cooperation in dealing with North Korea. It's remarkably short-sighted for politicians in this body to complicate the situation with this ZTE amendment, in my opinion. I believe it will undercut our ability to negotiate, and I think it jeopardizes our negotiators' credibility. Of course, Congress has an important role to play on all free trade agreements and certainly treaties. The advice and consent principle that's built into our format is absolutely critical. I'm not trying to undermine that in the least. However, it should not try to undercut our chief negotiator in the middle of a negotiating process. I personally have survived some of those in my career, and I understand the credibility of the person doing the negotiating is absolutely critical. However, in our situation, in dealing with any foreign leader, the full breadth of the responsibility of the legislative branch has to be explained up front. I'm fully supportive of that. To those who say this president is only picking winners and losers, going back to the ZTE issue, let me just say this. The only winner President Trump is trying to pick today is America. I think it's refreshing that we have somebody finally standing up and fighting for us for a change after decades of making sure that the third world was developed. This is about making sure America is treated fairly and is in the best place to do business in the world. It's about making America more competitive and secure. It's about making sure that the people who take showers after work and not before work get treated fairly in dealing with the rest of the world. This is about making America more competitive. It's about making America more secure. It's about ensuring our economic and national security for the next 100 years. This body should put aside self-interest, focus on the national interest, and give this president the room he needs to negotiate on everything from better trade to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Stop the hysteria, in my opinion. This is about a much bigger picture. The much bigger picture, Mr. President, we talk about the rise of China and the impact on the world. Let me just highlight a couple of things from this past weekend. President Trump raised an issue just this weekend. He issued a statement that offered an olive branch to Russia about the G7, that he felt like he would support them re-entering the G7. Well, what did Putin say? Putin said, well, no, thank you. I'm more interested in other things, like the SCO. Now, most people in this body aren't familiar with the SCO. It's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's basically China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and a few other countries in that area, but India and Pakistan just attended their first meeting, and I think this is an extremely dangerous development for the future of self-determining people. Mr. President, I think it's time for this body to get behind a unified approach with regard to what we're trying to do with trade, what we're trying to do in North Korea, and tell the rest of the world, look, we want to be the strongest ally you've ever seen, just like we've been for the last 200 years. But it's time, as the President has said in Davos, it's time to take care of our business so we can help you take care of your business. Thank you, Mr. President.